sorry to interrupt those conversations and that brownie eating. Do feel free to carry on. Yes, please don't worry about that. But I'm going to invite Mike up to who's going to give us our main talk. This is a slightly odd moment because on my notes I now have asked Mike who he is. I'm married to Mike, so I do know who he is. But Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Mike. I'm Mike. I'm married to Rachel. I have a daughter who's hit the terrible twos early. And I work here as part of the church and one of the pastors here. So, yeah, technically eating brownie is work for me. So that is good.
And our theme is peace. So what is something you do to feel peaceful?
Well, we were just talking about this. This is difficult. Concretely, to get away from it all at the end of a long day, to wind down for sleep. If I want to turn my brain off, what I do is, as you well know,
as I do,
watch YouTube videos about football tactics. There is no better way to shut your brain down than to watch a good YouTube video about football tactics.
And thankfully that's not what we're discussing this evening.
Yeah. Let me commend it now.
Great. I'll hand over to Mike.
Thanks. Let me say before I start, there should be a stack somewhere on your table of little A5, kind of mostly blank little handouts. They're doodling handouts. If you can see that stack near you, do distribute it to the people on your table. There should be pens on your table as well. The idea is that as I'm talking, you can be scribbling down either anything that it makes you think or questions you'd be interested in talking about afterwards, or you can just be doodling to help you pass the time. That is genuinely often quite helpful, so feel free to do whatever you want with those. Let's start with the obvious, but I think surprisingly difficult question, which is, what is peace? What are we actually talking about tonight? It feels like, even just from that starter conversation, you realise it's so big, it could go in all kinds of different directions, and it feels ridiculous to be choosing between cooperating with other people and, like, getting away from it all and trying to campaign for change. It feels such a huge topic. But what is it? What is it that we all want but is so hard to find? And I want to suggest that quite a good way to describe the heart of what peace is that peace equals right relationships. Peace is when our relationships are right in every dimension. So if you think about just these three dimensions of relationship, our relationship with the world around us, our relationship with others, and our relationship, slightly weirder to think about, but with ourselves. If all of those relationships were healthy and whole and not broken or twisted or full of tension in any way, that would feel like real peace, wouldn't it? The Hebrew word for peace, which kind of defines the whole way that the Bible thinks about the idea of peace, is shalom. It means not just an absence of conflict, but wholeness and completeness. It's a word that implies that all our relationships are in harmony, as they should be. Shalom is an orchestra, not just an orchestra that's refraining from hitting each other over the head with their instruments, but an orchestra that's in harmony together. It's a family, not just managing to get through Christmas Day without shouting at each other, but a family feasting together and growing together and flourishing, loving one another and letting that love overflow outwards. It's a word that captures a vision of what peace should be, and I think we all want that. We all want to be living lives where our relationships with the world and with other people and with ourselves are harmonious and flourishing. But, like Rachel was saying, it's so hard to find that, isn't it? And even when we kind of glimpse it for a moment, it's so hard to hold on to. It feels like there's some kind of missing ingredient that we don't have, that just means it's always slippery. So why is that? I was reading a book about anxiety a while ago, which is obviously one way in which we struggle to find peace. And I came across this really fascinating quote in there from Dr. Mark Cross. He's a psychiatrist, he leads a mental health charity, and he's also someone who's suffered for many years with anxiety himself. And he said, anxiety is all about a lack of connection and a need for spiritual answers. And I was really intrigued by that because he's not a Christian, he's a very secular kind of person. But I think it's a really interesting idea because it picks up on what we've just been saying about the idea that peace is about relationships. But he's suggesting that there's another dimension of relationship. There's a spiritual dimension of relationship. And he seems to be saying that, in his opinion, problems in that dimension are often at the root of our problems in the other dimensions. And I found that really fascinating because from that, totally kind of non-Christian secular psychiatrist, he's landing on basically the same conclusion that Jesus taught. So according to Jesus, our most fundamental relationship, the one that lies at the root of all the others, is our relationship with God. And I guess like the roots of a tree, it's not always out in the open and obvious. Some of us might not even really think that we have a relationship with God or that we need one. But Jesus says that the health of every branch is actually dependent on the health of that root. That the health of every other relationship in our lives, including our relationship with ourselves, depends on the health of our relationship with God. And Jesus says that God wants to give us peace with him. And so tonight we're going to look at a story, a parable that Jesus himself told that really gets to the heart of this idea of what it is to have peace with God and really gets to the heart of what Jesus is all about. The story is recorded for us in these biographies of Jesus, written by a guy called Luke. You should have one on your place. If you get it open to page 50, that would be really helpful. This is one of the 4 kind of earliest biographies of Jesus that are now called the Gospels in the Bible. And this is written by Luke. And in chapter 15, Luke tells us about a time where Jesus was speaking to a very mixed crowd. So you see at the very bottom of page 50, it says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering round to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" And so he's describing there this mixed crowd where you've got some people who are really notoriously immoral in all kinds of ways. They're kind of the outcasts of this society. They're shunned, they're looked down on, they know they've done a lot wrong. And normally they would keep their distance from anyone kind of like a religious leader. But they can't get enough of Jesus. They love Jesus. And Jesus welcomes them and eats with them and seems to honor them and love them. And then it almost sort of, you imagine at the back of the crowd, you've got these Pharisees and teachers of the law. These are very kind of religious people, and they are really furious that Jesus is welcoming these notorious sinners. They're kind of the morality police of the day. They're very self-righteous, they're very morally upright, and they're outraged that Jesus seems to be lowering standards so much by welcoming these other people. And Jesus starts telling them stories to explain why he's doing that, and to challenge them. And so we're going to look at the climactic story, which is under that little heading, The Parable of the Lost Son, on page 51. So we'll start at that little number 11. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them." So we've got a basic narrative set up. We've got a father who has 2 sons. And then the younger son comes and demands his inheritance. But when are you supposed to get your inheritance? It's when your parents die, right? So he is essentially saying, "Dad, can we just pretend that you're already dead so that I can take your money and get out of here?" And can you imagine being the father in that conversation? Can you imagine how it would feel? How hurtful and insulting that is. So I find it really surprising that then what Jesus doesn't say that he shouted back at him or that he denied he doesn't even deny his request. He doesn't try and force him to stay. He just divides his property between his two sons early. And not long after that, Jesus says, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. So what's Jesus saying as he starts this story? Well, the father is a picture of God. That's usually the case when Jesus tells a story with a father in it. And this younger son is Jesus painting a picture of all of us. It's quite a challenging picture, actually. He's diagnosing the root of our problem underneath all our struggles with peace. And he says it's this. We were created by a good and loving God. Everything we have is a gift from him. Everything we are is a gift from him. You know, take a breath right now. That was a gift from God. And Jesus says we were made to love him. We were made to love him back and do life with him, trusting him. But I reckon that most of us can really relate to the younger brother here. We all want independence. We don't want anyone else telling us what to do, not even God. We want to be the kind of supreme authority in our own lives. And I think this isn't just people who aren't religious. This is often true deep down of people who go to church every week or practice any other religion. On some level, we don't want to trust God. We don't want to trust him to want the best for us or to know what's best for us. We want to trust ourselves instead. I discovered a while ago that the most commonly chosen song at funerals in the UK is My Way by Frank Sinatra. We all want to be able to say, I did it my way. And so all of us, however consciously, whether just by kind of trying not to think about it too much or actively rejecting God, all of us, we kind of say to the God who made us and loves us what this son says to the father. Can we pretend that you're dead? Can we just sort of act like you're not there or like you don't really care? And Jesus says that's a deep, deep problem. And as the story goes on, he paints a picture of the kind of fallout from that broken relationship. So from little number 14. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomachs with the pods the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. He's run away from home looking for the good life, but he's ended up in the pigsty, friendless, starving to death. This is not shalom, is it? You know, how do you think his relationship is with other people at this point? How do you think he feels about himself at this point? And Jesus is warning us here. He's saying that if underneath the surface of our lives, our relationship with God is broken, we will never be able to find lasting peace. There's another story Jesus tells where he uses the image of someone trying to build a house on sand. And he basically says if we try to build our lives on the foundation of ignoring the God who made us, in the end, one way or another, a storm will come that brings the whole thing crashing down. And he says God is the only source of life and light and love. And so in the long run, if we turn away from the God of light, where can we go but into the darkness? If we turn away from the God who gives life, where can we end up but death? If we turn away from the God of love, where can we go but disconnection and isolation? If we're going to find lasting peace, it needs to grow from the root of a deep reconciliation with the God who we've all rejected and wronged. But Jesus says that reconciliation is exactly what God wants. I love what happens next in this story. So, picking up from little number 17. When he came to his senses, He said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate." I love this. You know, the son comes trudging back with nothing to offer, penniless, shameful, stinking of pig and sweat. But it turns out the father's been waiting for him. You know, it says while he's still a long way off, the father sees him. And he sees this ragged, stinking version of his son. And what does he do? He just runs. You know, he doesn't care that in that culture, you know, a respectable, fully grown man does not run. He doesn't care that every kid in the village is pointing and laughing at him as he hitches up his robes and legs it. He just wants to be with his son. He runs out to him, and when he gets there, he wraps him up in his arms. And he kisses him, dirty and disgusting as he is, and he gives him his own best robe to put on instead. He covers over all his shame. And the son had been planning to come back as a servant. You know, he'd been planning to try and work hard and earn his way back into the family and pay off his debts. But the father is having none of that. He just puts the family ring straight back onto his finger to say, "This is my son. He belongs here." And then he says, "Let's have a feast." As soon as the father sees that the son wants to come home, he runs out and he does everything for him. He demands no penance, no payment. He deals with all his dirt and with all his debts, and he welcomes him in to the family feast. This is shalom. Deep reconciliation, relationships restored, belonging and wholeness and peace. We were talking on our table about one of the ways that we look for peace is going home. And this is the welcome home that all our hearts are longing for. And Jesus is saying in this story, whatever you might have been told, whatever you might have imagined, this is what God is like. He's telling us what God is actually like, how God responds to our ignoring him and turning away from him and wronging him and other people in all kinds of ways. He doesn't demand that we face the consequences of our actions. He doesn't hold us at arm's length. He runs out to make peace with us. And what's really amazing is that Jesus doesn't just tell us that God is like that. Jesus shows us that God is like that. In this story, Jesus isn't just saying, "This is what God is like." Remember, the point of these stories was to explain why he was welcoming and eating with people who'd done all this stuff wrong. He's saying, "This is who I am. This is what I came to do." And when you read the Gospels, you read what Jesus says about himself, it's clear. He is saying, "I am your God, running out to spread my arms wide and forgive and embrace anyone who will come to me." And that is what Jesus was doing when he died on the cross. In this story, Jesus is kind of painting us a picture of his mission, of why he was so insistent through his life that he needed to die, that he needed to die in such an agonizing way, why he said that that was actually an act of love, that it was for our sake. Because in Jesus, God became a human in order to run out and meet us and reconcile us to himself, to restore peace between him and us. And what he's offering is not a kind of cheap papering over the cracks, a shallow reconciliation or peace. It's real peace. It's deep reconciliation, and so it's costly. Now, I don't know if you've ever wondered why the main symbol of Christianity is an instrument of torture. I remember many years ago talking with an older Christian about kind of why it was that Jesus had to die, and at the time I don't think I really got it. And they said to me, well, maybe it helps to imagine this. Imagine a couple who've been married for years, and they've made these promises to be faithful, they've built a life together, but then after many years the wife has an affair. For a year she's secretly seeing this other man. And now imagine that after that time she realizes that what she's been doing is wrong, and she realizes she wants to come back to her husband. She doesn't want to tear their life apart, and so she breaks off the affair and she confesses the truth to her husband, and she says, "Look, will you forgive me?" They said to me, look, at that point the husband has two choices. What he can't do is make the pain disappear. He can't just make there no pain in that situation. It's happened. What she's done has created it. But his choice is either he can turn that pain back onto her. He can try and demand that she face the consequences of what she's done. He can divorce her. He can dismantle their relationship entirely. Or he can take all of that pain onto himself. He can choose to just suffer it himself and refuse to give any of it back to her, refuse to take it out on her. And that's what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is costly because it means taking the pain of what someone has done to you into yourself and refusing to push it back on them. And that is what God does for us in Jesus. He wants to restore our relationship with him, and so he becomes a human being and he takes onto himself all the pain that our wrongdoing has created, all of the pain that our wrongdoing deserves, and he lets it crush him on the cross. He pays the price of our peace. He does that so that whoever we are, whatever we've done, we can be forgiven. We can be reconciled to him. Our relationship with him can be healed and restored. Jesus dies on the cross so that we can have lasting peace with God. Peace that's not kind of fragile to be broken by every time we mess up and we fail again, but is enduring because he's already paid the cost of everything we will ever do wrong. But then Jesus doesn't finish his story with the father running out and embracing the younger son and throwing the feast. There's a twist. So have a look at page 52 again, from the little number 25. Jesus hasn't finished yet. He wants to introduce us to the older brother. And the older brother is Jesus' portrait of these kind of self-righteous religious people at the back of the crowd who are angry that he's welcoming people they think are too bad to be forgiven. So, starting at little number 25. Meanwhile, the elder son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound." The elder brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who's squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you are always with me. Everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So the older brother basically really hates that his dad has just forgiven his younger brother like that. He's furious about it. Why? Well, look at what he says. He says, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders." Notice how he describes himself as a slave. His attitude is that he's been working and working and working to try and earn things from his dad, and so now he deserves to be rewarded. And so he's furious that his brother is being treated so well when he obviously doesn't deserve that. And the father's reply is basically, you've got it all wrong. I never wanted you to be my slave. I wanted you to be my son. I never needed you to earn anything. Everything I have is yours. Yeah, he basically says, I love you, but not because you deserve it. And I love your brother too, not because he deserves it. And then Jesus just stops. He ends the story on a cliffhanger. He doesn't tell us whether the older brother goes into the feast or if he stays outside. And I think it's like Jesus is sort of looking up at the self-righteous people at the back of the crowd and saying, right, what are you going to do? Are you going to stay angry? Refuse to admit that you need forgiveness too? Or are you going to swallow your pride and come into the feast? And that's a challenge for every one of us. It's the question that this story kind of poses to anyone who hears it. Will we let our pride resist God's offer of peace? Will we say we don't need forgiveness and so we don't want it, thank you very much? Or will we come home? Because if we'll put down our pride and come into the feast, if we'll embrace this peace with God that Jesus offers us, that then becomes the root out of which peace in all of those other relationships can grow. There's so much we could say about this, and we don't have time to scratch the surface, really. But just to pick out each of these three, this is the foundation, the root of true peace with ourselves. Because if the God of the universe knows all of your flaws, all of your failures, and he loves you enough to deal with them by dying on the cross so that he can forgive you forever and for free, if that's true of us, then we don't need to be haunted by those failures. We don't need to be desperately trying to hide our flaws from ourselves and from other people. We can face up to them knowing that we are loved anyway. There is a deep rootedness. We can know that we are held. And it doesn't mean that we never feel guilty. It certainly doesn't mean that we will never feel anxious again. But it means that when we do, we have a better response than just trying to ignore it or escape it. We can fight those feelings with the truth, with the huge, powerful truth that the God of the universe loves us and delights in us and is with us. And as we grasp that more and more, we grow deeper and deeper into peace with ourselves. Secondly, I think it is the foundation of peace with others as well. I mean, think about the relationship between those two brothers. Think of how it would be transformed from years of bitterness and tension if they both realized that they had done things wrong and they needed the Father's forgiveness, and they both received that forgiveness. I think so much of the pain and tension in our relationships comes because we're unable to forgive, or sometimes because we're unable to ask for forgiveness. But if we see Jesus on the cross, enduring all of that out of love for us, to offer us forgiveness, it stops us from believing the lie that we don't need forgiveness, that we're somehow above it, but also it empowers us to offer forgiveness to other people. If he's done that for us, surely we can try to pass it on. And that's really powerful. And finally, we can be confident that one day Jesus will bring us into complete peace, including perfect peace with the world around us. Because right now, if you're a Christian, I'm sure you know from experience that this kind of change I'm talking about, it's real, it's powerful, but it's nowhere near finished. We're still a mess in so many ways. But Jesus said that he will finish the job. He will bring us into true and total peace. And he didn't just say that, he gave us proof of it. In a couple of weeks' time, we're going to be thinking much more about the fact that Jesus, after he died on the cross, rose from the dead. And the resurrection is the guarantee, it's the proof that if we let him reconcile us to himself, one day he will raise us too into a healed world, a restored world of true shalom, a world of total freedom and flourishing and deep peace, centered on the blazing goodness of God, his beauty and his love. So I wonder what you make of all of that. I imagine that there's quite a range of responses in the room tonight. Maybe some of us have heard this story many times before, and actually the challenge and the invitation for us tonight is to let it speak to us and amaze us and challenge us in a fresh way. Maybe others of us here are skeptical. You're skeptical of this whole idea that we have this relationship with God at the root of our experience, and we need to kind of, that needs to be reconciled. It sounds to you like superstition, or the idea that God loves us feels like wishful thinking. And if that's you, can I encourage you, we are not at all asking anyone here to take a massive leap of blind faith and just believe it because we say it. This is a church which on Sundays is full of ridiculously brainy people of all different stripes. We want to be a place that encourages us to look at this stuff rationally, to ask the questions, and to investigate the truth. Who was Jesus? What's the evidence? What makes more sense of the world we live in? Is it atheism or is it God? Is it one God or another? Is it the God we meet in Jesus? And I realize that tonight we haven't really done any of that intellectual stuff at all. So I'd just really urge you to come back next time in 2 weeks if you can, because we'll be looking at the thing that persuaded me that this was all actually true, the solid kind of historical evidence that Jesus really came back from the dead. But also, do just ask the questions that you have on your tables. Do have a look on the bookstall later. We would love you to investigate this, to turn your brain on and engage. Or maybe for others of us, we're used to the idea of God, but actually this is a really new way of thinking about God. It's a really strange picture of God for us. Maybe we're used to the idea that God is distant or cold, and we've never really wanted to be close to him because of that. Religion just felt like something that we sort of were supposed to do. Or maybe we've always felt like the older brother, like we're meant to be working and trying to be good enough and keep up our religious duties so that God will be pleased with us and bless us. And if that's you, I'd just love to encourage you to really wrestle with this story, to try to grasp what Jesus is saying here about himself and about God. Ask your questions about it. Ask others on your table maybe what it's like for them to relate to God like this. And please do take copies of Luke's gospel and read more about Jesus, more of what he said and what he did. Because according to Jesus, if we look at him, we're seeing what God is actually like. Great, that is more than enough from me. I'll hand over now to your table hosts, and we'll have some tea and coffee will come round, and we'll have a chance over the next half an hour to discuss that story and what you made of this a bit more. Thanks very much.